What if I told you that behind Johnny Depp's quiet smile, behind the calm demeanor he often displays in front of cameras, there's a storm he's been battling that almost no one truly sees? We all witnessed the trial. We were bombarded with endless headlines, constant replays of courtroom footage, and explosive testimonies that divided the internet and dominated global news cycles. It felt as though the entire world had an opinion, as if the trial itself had morphed into a spectacle, a social media battleground where people chose sides, shared memes, and picked apart every word spoken. But when the verdict was finally read aloud and the dust of the media circus began to settle, Johnny Depp didn't just ride off into a happy ending. There was no champagne toast, no grand celebration of vindication. What happened after the cameras turned off, what happened in the silence, is what so few are actually talking about. And that silence speaks volumes. Because the truth is, winning the case didn't erase the years of torment he endured. It didn't bring back lost opportunities, or mend the broken relationships, or soften the psychological blow of being vilified on a global stage. That trial may have ended with a legal win, but emotionally, psychologically, Johnny was still deep in the trenches. And if you've ever been through something so grueling, so utterly draining, that even when it's supposedly over, you still don't feel right, then maybe you can understand. You still smile in public, you still show up when expected, but on the inside, you're barely hanging on. That's exactly where Johnny Depp found himself. A man worn down by years of false accusations, public ridicule, and the emotional weight of trying to clear his name in front of a global audience. What few people realize is how deeply personal the aftermath of that trial became for Johnny. Most fans, understandably, assumed he'd take that legal win and run with it. That he'd dive headfirst back into Hollywood, headline another major blockbuster, walk red carpets with his signature swagger, maybe even release a tell-all interview. But he didn't do any of that. In fact, he did something completely unexpected, something that only someone truly seeking healing would do. He disappeared. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a tabloid scandal kind of way. But quietly, intentionally, and completely. Johnny left the United States behind and retreated to Europe. Not for the glitz, not for attention, and certainly not to escape the consequences of fame, but because he needed silence. He needed distance. He needed a kind of peace that Hollywood could never offer. It wasn't about hiding, it was about surviving. And those close to him could see that clearly. Behind the calm exterior, Johnny was emotionally wrecked. He confided in trusted friends and inner-circle allies that the entire ordeal, years of accusations, court proceedings, media humiliation, left him not just tired, but devastated. The kind of devastation that lingers, that reshapes your sense of self. For years, he had been portrayed as a monster, a manipulator, an abuser. His name had become synonymous with scandal, and whether people believed him or not, he carried the burden of that narrative every single day. And it wasn't just about public perception. It was about the tangible, painful losses he suffered along the way. He was dropped from major roles with no warning, often before he even had a chance to defend himself. The Fantastic Beasts franchise removed him despite there being no criminal conviction, no official ruling, only allegations. Corporate entities that had once built their brand on his charisma now wanted nothing to do with him. Longtime colleagues suddenly stopped calling. Directors looked elsewhere. And in Hollywood, reputation is currency. Once it's damaged, it's nearly impossible to restore. But perhaps the most painful thing wasn't losing work. It was losing trust. Losing faith in people. When the world decides who you are based on rumors and headlines, and not on who you truly are, it erodes something essential in you. Johnny once said in an interview, "You're guilty until proven innocent, and even then, it doesn't matter." That line isn't just a clever quote. It's a haunting truth. Because even after winning the defamation trial, even after presenting evidence, and even after gaining support from a massive segment of the public, there were still whispers. Still people who questioned. Still those who refused to let go of the old narrative. And for someone like Johnny, whose life and career have been shaped by perception, that lingering doubt was a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. In the aftermath, he chose not to return to the industry that had so quickly abandoned him. He didn't beg for roles or demand apologies. He didn't try to relaunch himself with a dramatic PR campaign. Instead, he turned inward. He picked up a paintbrush. He poured himself into canvases, creating vivid, emotional works that expressed what words couldn't. Each painting was more than just art, it was a release. A way to make sense of feelings that had no language. For Johnny, painting became a form of therapy, a sacred space where he could express his pain, his confusion, his resilience. He also returned to his musical roots. With his band, the Hollywood Vampires, he went on tour, not to reclaim fame, but because music offered him another form of healing. The stage, the guitar, the lyrics, they weren't about applause anymore. They were about survival. About feeling something real. When he sang, he wasn't acting. He wasn't performing. He was simply existing, one note at a time. And that authenticity is what drew people to him even more deeply. Because here was a man who had been dragged through the mud, torn apart by headlines, and yet he stood there, still creating, still breathing life into his pain through art. And that's what he's continued to do. Slowly, quietly, and with great intentionality, Johnny Depp has been healing. Today, he spends most of his time in a quiet village in Somerset, England, far removed from the paparazzi, the noise, and the pressure. Locals describe him as kind, humble, and polite. He shops for books, buys art supplies, chats with neighbors. There are no grand entourages, no blinding flashes of camera bulbs. Just a man who is finally reclaiming the one thing he had lost for so long, peace. And it's worth noting how profound that choice is. Because Johnny could have cashed in on his fame at any point. He could have done exclusive interviews, launched memoirs, sought revenge in the public eye. But he didn't. He chose something far more radical in today's world: stillness. Privacy. Reflection. In an age where everyone is expected to share every detail of their journey, Johnny chose to guard his soul. And that kind of self-preservation is not weakness, it's strength. Psychologists have long studied the effects of public trauma and emotional exhaustion. According to experts like Dr. Lauren Steinberg, recovery from trauma isn't linear. It's unpredictable. Sometimes you move forward, only to fall back again. Emotional wounds don't follow a schedule. They don't heal on command. And for someone like Johnny, who was not only fighting a legal battle but also a battle for his own humanity, that recovery is even more complicated. Dr. Steinberg often says, the body keeps the score. Meaning, even when you think you've moved on, your body remembers. Your mind remembers. And that memory can resurface when you least expect it. So Johnny turned to art. To nature. To quiet. And to those who truly know him. He surrounded himself not with industry insiders or press agents, but with people who see him for who he is, not who the headlines claimed he was. And slowly, piece by piece, he began to rebuild. After the trial ended and the public spectacle died down, Johnny knew that returning to the noise would only prolong his pain. He didn't want to be caught in the endless loop of rehashing events, giving interviews, or responding to more questions designed to stir controversy rather than bring clarity. He needed something deeper, something still and grounding. That's why his move to Somerset wasn't just geographical, it was emotional and spiritual. Somerset, with its rolling hills, ancient villages, and the hush of nature, gave him the kind of solace that no studio lot or Beverly Hills mansion could offer. There, away from flashing cameras and the constant buzz of media commentary, Johnny started spending more time in his home studio. He would wake early, before the world came alive, and just sit in front of a blank canvas. Sometimes, he'd pick up a brush and paint for hours. Other times, he'd just stare, letting the silence speak louder than any word could. His artwork wasn't meant to be commercial or flashy. It was raw, messy, emotional. A mirror of what he felt inside, sometimes anger, sometimes grief, but often a kind of quiet hope that healing was possible. He painted portraits, not of famous people, but of the forgotten, faces etched with stories, lines that spoke of survival, eyes that carried untold truths. He said in passing once to a close friend, "When I can't talk about it, I paint it." And that's what he did, over and over. In addition to his painting, Johnny immersed himself in simple, grounding routines. He would take long walks along countryside paths, often alone, sometimes with one of his close friends or trusted security team a short distance behind. These walks weren't about exercise, they were about breathing. About reconnecting with a world that wasn't judging him. Birds chirping in the distance, wind rustling through the trees, the smell of damp earth, all of it became a kind of therapy. Something in that silence spoke to him, reminded him that not everything in life is loud, cruel, or performative. He also reconnected with a smaller, tighter circle of people. Not the Hollywood elites or the socialites who quickly distanced themselves when things got tough. Instead, he leaned into the company of those who had always seen him as Johnny, not Captain Jack Sparrow, not the tabloid headline, but the man. His longtime friends, his bandmates, his family. People who didn't care about what the internet said. People who never asked him to explain or defend himself. With them, he could laugh. He could cry. He could be silent without being questioned. That kind of safety is rare, especially in an industry that thrives on reinvention and masks. One friend, who's known Johnny since his early days in music, said, "We don't talk about the trial. We don't need to. He knows we love him. That's enough." And that simplicity became his sanctuary. Weekend dinners, shared laughter, long nights strumming a guitar or sipping wine by a fire, these became the moments where his soul began to stitch itself back together. He also started journaling again. Not for a memoir, not for public consumption, but for himself. Scrawled pages full of stream-of-consciousness thoughts, moments of frustration, moments of gratitude. Writing helped him process what painting couldn't. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night and just start writing. Pouring out the parts of him that still felt broken, confused, or tired. It wasn't always pretty, but it was honest. And in that honesty, he began to rediscover the voice he thought he'd lost. Slowly, day by day, Johnny started to feel more like himself. Not the version of himself that everyone else expected, but a quieter, wiser, more grounded version. The kind of self that only emerges after walking through hell and surviving with scars. He wasn't chasing redemption anymore, he was cultivating peace. And that, more than any verdict, was the real victory. There's something incredibly inspiring about that. Because whether you're a movie star or a regular person just trying to get through the day, the truth is this: healing takes time. It takes patience. And it takes courage. Johnny Depp's journey is not just about Hollywood, or fame, or scandal, it's about the very human need to reclaim your life after it's been torn apart. It's about finding new meaning in old passions. It's about recognizing that your worth doesn't depend on public approval. And it's about honoring your own story, no matter how messy or misunderstood it might be. If Johnny's story resonates with you, maybe it's because you've been carrying your own silent struggle. Maybe you've gone through something that no one else fully understands. Maybe you've had to rebuild, quietly, in the background, while the world assumed you were fine. If that's you, then let Johnny's journey be a reminder: you are not alone. You are not broken. And your healing, however slow or invisible it may seem, is valid. So ask yourself, what passion have you neglected that might help you heal? What space do you need to protect your peace? What boundaries do you need to set? Because protecting your peace is not selfish. It is survival. Johnny Depp may never fully return to the Hollywood spotlight the way he once did. And maybe that's not the point. Maybe the real victory isn't about box office numbers or public adoration. Maybe the real victory is this: waking up each day with dignity, with purpose, and with the quiet strength that comes from knowing you survived. And not just survived, but transformed. And maybe, so can you. If this story touched you, stay tuned for more. Because the next chapter in Johnny's journey might surprise you even more. Until then, thank you for being here. For listening. And for remembering that the strongest people often fight the quietest battles.